For those that are just joining into the recording, all I said was that I work for Elevated Third. My name's Joe Meersman. I'm a senior developer. Elevated Third is a company based out of Denver, Colorado. We are a digital agency. About 40 people at this point, I think. We have an office in Seattle, a smaller office in Raleigh, and then our main office in Denver, Colorado. We mostly do business-to-business Drupal applications and websites, larger scale builds. Just to give you guys an idea of kind of the type of projects that I'll be talking about today. Our typical scale, a project takes about 9 months to a year on average for us to build out. That's kind of from start to end. Some take significantly longer, some take significantly less, but that's about the average that we're at. They tend to be larger kind of web application builds, a lot of marketing integrations, personalization, all that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit of the growth process that I've gone through over the years, coming from learning how to build websites on my own personally, doing contract work, moving into agency life, working up from being an intern to junior developer to leading projects. Has not always been an easy path. I've definitely made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I'm probably going to make a lot more, but I'm hoping to help prevent some of you guys from making the same ones that I did, or at least give you some tools to work with. My colleagues one of my colleagues has seen this presentation yesterday. I'm putting together some stuff last minute. I changed about everything in here at about 12:30 in the morning. So we'll see how it goes. But I wanted to kind of spice it up and get done with the boring stuff. So let's talk about something a little bit more fun. I've been super into Magic lately. I don't know if anybody else plays Magic the Gathering, but I decided that my presentation was kind of boring, and what I really wanted to do at 12:30 in the morning was play more Magic, but I decided to work on this instead so that you guys would have something fun to look at. So let's talk a little bit about Magic. It's full of enchanting landscapes, awesome guys, cool things like this. If no one's played, it's a card game. It's one-on-one, it's player versus player, and basically you put cards out and you battle and you have resources that you use. I don't have to get totally into it, it's just kind of a theme for the deck, so bear with me if this is way over your head. If not, that's probably right in your element. So let's bring this back a little bit to what I do for work, and talk about kind of what you guys came to hear. So I made some Magic cards for this deck. This one is Rally the Team, so it's a legendary instant. And really what I want to talk about here is connecting with clients. This is important for a developer. So a lot of what I'm talking about today is going to be kind of a project management senior developer mix. But I really want to talk from the developer's point of view of how we kind of do this stuff. So step one for me, and something that I've always been interested in for these projects, and something that I think is really fascinating in general, is pulling ideas from people's brains, looking at problems that exist kind of in this ethereal world of business and transactions and marketing and all of this stuff, and kind of trying to get that stuff out into code that actually solves these problems in a meaningful way. You can look at this in the same way you could look at construction or architecture or plumbing. I mean, really just kind of any intense problem solving, I think, is what's the most interesting part of my job. And so this is kind of the part that I like the most. Getting together with clients, having the discovery meeting, finding out kind of what the problems are, and talking through that to begin with. I think the biggest part of this is looking at this through a couple different lenses. So really what I'm trying to hone in on in this conversation is knowing what you're good at, both as a developer and as the company that you work for. So I think this is something that took a long time for me to kind of fall into. I think it's something that tends to take a long time for agencies to fall into, but who's your target market? What skill sets do you bring to solve problems, and what are you really bad at? So when you're talking with clients and you're figuring out all of this stuff, I think really just being involved, in that discovery process, starting with empathy there, being super honest, and this is throughout the entire process really, and then finding out what the real problems are, and approaching those problems, looking at it through the light of what do I do well and what does my company do well, and then for the things that you don't do well, how are you going to solve those? So what I really want to stress here is that it's probably not a custom build, unless you like going into the deep end and never coming out. This could be outsourcing. I know people don't like to hear it. It could be relying on third-party APIs. It could be relying on software that's already built that does this for you. So a good example is Elevated Third has recently really focused on business to business, on large personalization and marketing sites, and we've really moved away from things that we're not as good at, say e-commerce or custom education platforms, or anything else that we don't necessarily do as well. We used to just kind of say yes to all of those projects, and I think we've really honed our business goals to kind of just do what we're good at, and then if the project involves something that we're not necessarily as good at, maybe we partner with another agency, maybe we find a way to solve that, and just kind of being honest with ourselves and with the client about what we're good at. And really just understanding what they're looking to solve. Another big part of the projects that I work on is risk management. I think this is one of the hardest things to kind of get under control, and something that I think we still struggle with as an agency and personally. But I think it's something really important to talk about and to be upfront and forward with your clients. The hardest part of this is communicating risk. So you just made a sale, your sales team maybe just made a sale, client is meeting your team for the first time, you're talking about stuff in discovery, everything's going great, you're the developer in the room and you're thinking, this is going to be really hard, doesn't sound right to me, that doesn't even seem like the same problem that they were talking about 5 minutes ago. Your sales guy's probably sitting in the room like don't say that, like we can do that, don't say that. But I think it's important to be kind of always upfront and honest about what the risks are in the project, because the project stakeholders need to know what the potential problems are so that they can have an idea of how to mitigate that. I'm on my third house that I've owned. I've learned a lot of things about home ownership in the same way that I've kind of learned about development, and one of them is having contractors out. I'd rather know that this $700 problem I've been quoted at could potentially be a $4,000 problem. So I'd rather have them say, hey, this could be $500 if I get it done right away, but if I hit this, it could potentially be $4,000. What do you want to do when we hit that point, right? I want to know that. The clients want to know that. So being able to communicate that, and I'll give you guys some tools to do that in just a minute, I think is really, really crucial. Clients want to know what the budget is. I've gone to a lot of talks in the past at several Drupal cons and other Drupal camps, and I don't think it's as popular anymore, but I think for a while people were saying like get away, don't do estimates, like clients don't, you can just do estimate free work or whatever, and I've never once met a single client that's like, I don't care what this is going to cost, ever. But really when budgets demand, what I tend to do is make assumptions. So I get a lot of times where junior developers will come to me and they'll say, how the F am I supposed to estimate this? It's one line item in an RFP. I have no idea what the client wants here. I don't think they know what they want. I have no idea how long this is going to take. And my answer to that is they want to know how long it's going to take, so give them an answer. So what that means is make an assumption about what they want. And document that. So write down, this is what I assumed from this line item. I'm going to put this view in, how close can you get to actually building this thing in your mind that's totally not real? Present that to the client and then figure out how to get it to a more real state. Because then at least you come with something concrete to start with. You also come with something concrete as a number to give to the client. And you can say, if what we're talking about is not this, the potential is now exponentially higher, or, I mean, maybe it's lower. Probably not, but maybe. So just kind of communicating those assumptions, where those risky points are, is super important. I know this seems really obvious, but your estimate should coincide with your requirements. This I've seen before too. So you're going through discovery, your UX, your content team, maybe you, if you're just a one-man shop, you're writing a bunch of requirements down in a spreadsheet, then you go to do the estimate, and you maybe don't even open this other doc. You just think about, they want, an integration with this, and they want to do that, and I think I know what this is going to be. Everything in your estimate sheet should correspond directly with a line item in the requirements. If not, you're missing something or you're adding something. And then the last thing is prototyping and sandboxing. I'm only going to mention it here because it is a way to mitigate risk, but I'm going to go into it a little bit more closer to the end. I wanted to pull up a kind of not great screenshot of a spreadsheet that we use internally. I've worked on this for a long time, refining kind of how we do this, but I wanted to just show you guys quickly the way I think about it. Is I usually will break out my estimate into sections. So in this example, we have a section called communities that this client needed. I then try to break each line item out for that feature into an estimate. The estimated hours column, I try to keep underneath 8 hours. You can see that I don't always do that. But essentially what I want to do here is break this down into the smallest amount of hours possible so that I'm literally writing build view, add fields to view, as close to detailed estimates as I can get. And then I put in my assumptions here. So talking about this really quick, like looking about this column is essentially going to be if everything that I've written in these notes or assumptions column goes according to plan. So we got an estimated hours. This is going to be, hey, and by the way, this almost never happens, and that's why I never have 100% certainty here, but we'll get to that in a second. But hey, if everything I've put into the notes column goes according to plan, and everything that we've talked about, the way that I've described it or I'm thinking about it is right, I think I can get this done for X amount of hours. I use this column to communicate risk. So this is probably, in my opinion, the most important part. I think our sales guys think that these are the most important numbers. But this, to me, is maybe one of the most important things to look at because this is where the account manager, the project lead, the salespeople can kind of get a feel for how certain we are we can actually hit any of these numbers. And they can use this to kind of make a number of different ways to present the numbers to the client. So some people are okay with ranges and assuming risk. Some people want to see this could cost me $400 or $4,000. Some people just want to know it could go up to $4,000. Some people don't want to hear that at all. And they only want to hear this low number. And when we give that to them, at least these guys, when they're giving it to them, know that this is a risk. So this is kind of what this is for. I put some notes up here for everybody in our template for it of kind of what those mean. But essentially, like your 20% would be a line item in an RFP. Your best guess might be you've had some conversations around this. A solid estimate might be you've had some conversations with your internal team and or a UX or content strategist and or the person doing the designs. 80% is like you've made a build spec of this, you have a wireframe, and you probably have some designs, and you know what this is going to work like. So that's kind of what we do for these. This all tallies up. This is really, I didn't notice this till I took the screenshot, but I actually called it just mark this column as to whether or not this line item in the estimate actually matches up to a requirement. Again, making sure every single thing in here matches to a requirement in the requirements doc and going through the requirements doc and doing the same thing when I put it into the estimate, just to triple check. Any questions about this?
don't you find once you give them that number, that estimated hour, that they just can't separate from that? Like,
Yes.
I've found that they never depart from that estimated hour. Like,
Yep.
And they totally don't get the certainty, uncertainty thing at all.
Yep. So I think a lot of the ways that, and this is just, I have to have a lot of different conversations with people about the way they think about their project. One of the ways that I've actually had this conversation with my dad when he was going through a website rebuild for his company, which I wasn't doing, thank God. He was saying, well, I just don't understand why it's not like buying a car, right? And I think that's like a big misnomer for people, is they feel like they should be getting feature X, Y, and Z from a car, and a car is something that's pre-built in a factory. So what we're doing, most of the people in this room, is building a custom car from scratch based on what a client wants. So I think that's one way I try to kind of communicate to people that this isn't a fixed number ever. The other thing is, and I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning, but Elevated Third does all of our work at time and materials. So keep that in mind too, that what we're basically doing is getting buy-in for the risk from the client, and that's written into the contract. So
when you say time and materials, you're meaning, well, this is an estimate, and there will always be an estimate, but
correct.
It could go over.
Yep, and as much as I want to communicate that to the client, because I want them to understand and I want them to buy in, what they're really doing is signing down on the dotted line legally that this is an estimate. Right. And I think that's really important. So I thank you for bringing it up. It's a really good point. They know, either they know or they've signed that this is an estimate and that we're giving them a best guess. And I think that's really, really important. I used to do fixed bid. I used to work for companies that did fixed bid. I think fixed bid is okay. I think it's really hard to get estimates right. So yeah, I think it's tough for people to make these decisions of whether you can go time and materials with certain clients. I think Elevated Third is great for having made that shift. I appreciate it, but I definitely understand some people can't always go that route. And in that case, like, definitely communicating to people that if we're going to go fixed bid, you may want to have some contingencies in place that are either dollar amounts or scale backs, outsourcing again, third-party APIs, pre-built software. All of that stuff's really important to kind of rely on to try to get around this uncertainty.
Also, really important to have a good project manager,
yes.
client rep that keeps
Yep.
them informed of where you are in terms of the burn down and costs.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, though, that part of the reason that I'm doing this talk is to get everybody to kind of buy into that a little bit. So yes, rely on your teammates, but also everybody in here, I assume most people in here, this is your career. It doesn't hurt to kind of develop some of these skills yourself. You want to be able to rely on your teammates. If they're not always saying the right thing in the client meeting, sometimes you have to kind of help steer the ship yourself. So I agree and disagree a little bit, but
Yeah.
cool. Let's keep going. I don't know how I'm doing on time. Seems like I'm okay. Talk a little bit about data architecture. This is a little bit, I think personally, a little bit more fun of a topic. It kind of goes like a not fun topic, then fun, and then not fun. But data architecture is a little bit more of that kind of dev focused. The thing that we really use for data architecture, and I don't have a lot of slides for this, I just want to show you guys, is our build spec. Again, and just another spreadsheet that I found really useful over the years. If you guys aren't doing something like a build spec, I highly recommend it. I'm not going to go into massive detail in order to kind of save some time, but this document ends up, it sort of starts out as a sandbox and a building place to kind of construct ideas, to paper prototype, if you will, to collaborate with the UX and content strategy team, and to collaborate with your designers as well. It also gives you a building point for actual data entry into Drupal. So what we do is lay out all of our fields, including machine names, descriptions, all their settings. We do node types, vocabularies, This is just the template, so we haven't built all this stuff out in this one yet, but just to kind of show you custom entities. We talk about our media elements, paragraphs, user fields. This one doesn't have it, but I'll usually add views. Really anything else I can put in to document this to get a project started. This is where I usually start before I've even set up a sandbox in Drupal, just to start getting some brainstorming. And then, really importantly, this moves into onboarding other developers. It can move into client discussions to say, your UX and content strategist can look at this and say, I think we're missing a taxonomy field here. You can add it in, show it to the client, confirm. You can even use this, we don't as much, but you could, to check off whether or not this component has been built, where it exists, all that kind of stuff. This is a living document in our world, so when I assign developers work, I try to have everything set out for them. Sometimes projects are big enough that I have several lead developers, and I say, you own these pieces, and just add stuff in the build spec and change it as you need. But by the end of the project, this should match your Drupal site exactly. If anything went into Drupal or changed, you should be changing it here, vice versa, so that everybody can kind of just look at one place and understand essentially the layout and architecture of the site. Probably not super mind-blowing or new, but I still think a lot of people don't document as well as they should for data architecture. So if you're not, I would definitely recommend doing something like this. We've set this up so that the fields kind of all pull from each other. We're not entering fields on node types. And in the fields section, if you add a field to fields, it just pre-populates across, you can essentially pre-populate that across the tabs. So it doesn't end up being a huge time constraint. In fact, I think it saves us time in the long run. Any questions about that?
I was going to ask, so do you have set up like regular reviews of this and your budget spec? Because I know like with being a living document, it's going to change and essentially change the scope of the original project.
Yes. I didn't put this in here, but that's a really good question, and it reminded me that I should bring it up. Re-estimate. We're time and materials. The client wants to know when things change, so we'll do an estimate after an RFP, where we almost know nothing in some cases.
Right.
Then we go into discovery and do another estimate post-discovery once we've got this in some sort of stage or fashion. On a 9-month project, let's say we're working on a project for a year, I would guess that we're probably doing a re-estimate every 2 months. Just that check-in is super crucial. It's not something that I did on smaller projects. Once I've started getting onto some of these larger projects, you have to know where you are internally. You have to kind of know where things lined up. And in 2 months, it's changed so drastically. 9 times out of 10, you need to kind of get a re-grasp on the numbers. Communicate that to the client. If you're over, figure out how to come back under. I'd rather do that 2 months in, 4 months in, 6 months in, than do it 14 months in after I'm $400,000 over budget.
Right.
So yes, does that help answer that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So do you ever take this, once your UX designs kind of get finalized, and just kind of start mapping,
Yes.
Here are the page elements, here are the fields?
Yep, so I'll take this document and go into, we use InVision, and just literally comment, this is this field, this is this field. It depends on the developer. Sometimes I don't have to do that. But if I'm working with another, say a site build lead on this or something, like they can take this and mostly figure that out. But if I'm working with a junior dev that's trying to figure all this out, like I'm going to come in and comment all of InVision with everything.
We did that, and we also found it as good as documenting for the client. So the client was doing data entry, and if they could see what fields went where visually, they got it.
Yep, absolutely. It's a huge help. Yep, and I think again, just reiterating that transparency. So like this seems like an internal document, but this is a completely shareable deliverable with the client. It depends on, again, like I don't know everybody's clients. If you had a completely non-technical savvy client, maybe not. But 9 times out of 10, I feel like people really want to see this and understand kind of how their architecture is working. And that's, comes back to, again, getting your clients invested, really listening to them and understanding kind of where they're coming from. I think getting that relationship really helps with the sharing out of this information. Another thing I'll do is share the dev site super early with clients that are into this. So if you get a client super into your build spec, that same client can probably look at a dev site without theming on it and understand that that's a continuation of this document. I know that sounds scary. People are like, well, I don't want to show my client stuff before it looks pretty or whatever. But like getting somebody involved from the very beginning of the project allows for that kind of continuous growth of like, here's what we talked about. Now look at this document. Here's how I put it into this document. Now look at the Drupal site in Bardic or whatever. It matches this. We'll slowly get it to look like these things over here, right? And I think people can kind of see that and really get involved with their process, which again is one of the biggest things I think to get out of this talk is getting people kind of into the dev process a little bit more. Use caution, but you know what I'm saying. Any other questions on that? Yeah.
You mentioned InVision. What is that?
InVision's a design tool. I don't know a ton about it. If you have more questions about it, I can show you after after the presentation.
Our alternate to that is Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Zeppelin.
Yep, we used to use Zeppelin as well. Cool, task management. This is an actual magic card. I didn't create this one. It just seems super fitting. This is not one of the ones that I'm a huge fan of doing. We'll talk about it a little bit, but we'll just read this really quick because I think it's hilarious. Your eternal taskmaster always is tapped and exhausted. When they tap, they can pay 2 of the resources, and if they do, you can bring another developer onto the project, essentially. That used to be on the project and didn't want to come back, and now you can bring them back. So, task management is everyone's job. This is probably the thing that people at things like this like to hear the least. I personally don't like who loves task management? Cool. You will actually be surprised. I work with several people that love it, but they're not usually at developer events because we've got jobs doing dev. But I hate task management, and I do task management every day. So the reason I do it every day is because I don't like to be super over budget on my projects. So I've kind of learned to take a little bit of bad medicine every day in order to not feel totally sick at the end of a project.
I mean, I enjoy the result of doing task management well.
Yeah.
I just don't enjoy the actual process.
Right. Yep. Yep. So I'll just talk a little bit about why it's important, why I do it every day, kind of how to keep on top of it. We talked about using the requirements, and we talked a little bit about bringing that client along. Bring yourself along to these projects as well. So we talked about building requirements out of discovery. Use those requirements to build the estimate. Use the estimate to build your tasks. I know it doesn't sound mind-blowing, but again, you'd be surprised how many people just start putting tasks into a task system without making sure that it's covered in the estimate, and your estimate should have already been made sure that it was covered by requirements. So this should be a continuous process throughout the entire thing. Please don't do a bunch of work in an estimate and then just go silo into adding tasks, because
You don't do that at like the sprint level?
Yeah, so what I do is I'll start by taking high-level tasks from an estimate, put those into a logical order for sprints. The developer, and the reason I think everybody's job is task management, is who's going to probably know the best about that? Is it going to be your account manager? Probably not. Maybe a project manager. They should know. The developer will definitely know, I can't do this until I do this, and I can't do this until I do this. So the developer has to be involved. Yeah, you want your account team and your project manager involved for resourcing and who's going to be doing this work and helping you kind of schedule all of that out. But essentially kind of breaking these out into high-level tasks and then going back through with a fine-tooth comb for every sprint and re-breaking those out into smaller tasks that are actually doable by developers. So I start with placeholders. I go in and I literally say we'll be doing this API first because we have to have this data from that API, and then we have to have this system, build these views that are based on those content types after that, and then I start going in and saying here's a task with this view, here's a link to the build spec, here's a link to the design, here's a link to the estimate, here's all the pieces you need to build this. I do that per sprint. We usually do 2-week sprints at Elevated Third. I personally don't think it matters, depending on your team. You do, I mean, I probably wouldn't do 2-month sprints, but 2-week, 3-week, 1 week. As long as you're kind of having that regular cadence, checking in on these tasks weekly, and then really I wrote this as well, check and update tasks daily. This is something that the senior developer or lead on the project needs to do. And shockingly, it's also something that the junior developer on the project needs to do. I have to still go in every day, and it's never going to change. I've decided for my career and make sure that everybody has entered time, entered comment, and moved something along that they've been working on, because 9 times out of 10, they work, and that's great. I want my developers head down. I just want them to take 20 minutes at the end of the day to talk about where they ended up, to enter time on that task, because let me ask this too, how many people in here work at an agency or somewhere that does tons of projects all the time? How many times do you work on something for 4 hours on Monday and then get scheduled again on Wednesday the following week to wrap that task up? How do you know where you left off and how many hours you spent unless you went in and made a note, wrote down how many hours were in there, and then looked at it? What I find a lot of times is that the developer on the task for say a 16-hour task doesn't know that they worked 24 hours on it because it's been spread out over the last 3 weeks. So this prevents that. Doesn't always work. Sometimes we still go over. But logging your time to those tasks is super important to do daily as well, because I've recently had this happen where a developer is working on a task and they get the task done and it gets marked off, and you look at the hours and you're right under budget, and then the next week comes by and you haven't scheduled anyone to work on this task. The task hasn't made any more progress, but all of a sudden there's 20 more hours on the task. That's because your developer waited until Friday or whatever to log their time, and now you're over budget. So please, again, help your seniors out. If you're not a senior developer, help make my life easier, log your time. Cool, that's all I need to say about that. I mean, I hope I don't just sound like I'm beating you guys up.
I used to work in a place though where no task could be more than 1 day long.
Yep.
And so basically, and it also had sticky notes. They had a whiteboard. If you're working on something, you stick it in that working on.
Yep.
And then the project manager could note that, oh, it was in there this day. It's marked for 1 day.
Yep.
And it hasn't moved to done. What's going on?
Yep. Yeah, and I'll say, like, even if it's not for your sake, which sometimes it's not, sometimes you're fine, like, just heads down, getting work done, but, like, nobody else knows what you're doing. I don't know what you're working on. Your account manager doesn't know what you're working on. The client certainly doesn't know what you're working on, unless you're kind of letting people know. So just thinking about it kind of from a holistic perspective also kind of helps at least me to motivate each day to kind of make sure I get that stuff done. Nobody's perfect. I try not to harp on people all the time, but just reminding people. I actually literally set a reminder on my calendar to just look at it every day. Otherwise, I won't. No one ever wants to do this, and so I feel like it just goes out of your brain. This one's really important. I actually meant to title this prototyping and time boxing. Sandboxing is also good, but really time boxing is the most important thing. So the time box, basically what this is, it's one of the most, I think, underutilized tools for developers on projects, and I think it's one of the most useful. If you don't understand, this is coming back to mitigating risks, but I think it kind of just deserves its own section. It's something that I got out of, I believe it or not, started my development career in video games, working for a small game company. And paper prototyping and prototyping in general is massive in the game industry. If you're working for a company that cares about not wasting their money, which I didn't, but I still prototyped. So basically what you want to do for time boxing and prototyping is is look at something on that estimate spreadsheet that's at 20% or 40%. Usually, for Elevated Third, this is a third-party API that we've never worked with before. This could potentially be something that's in that area of, we're not great at this, we haven't done it a lot before, we don't have a lot of other alternatives than to build something custom. Let's see where we can get. So what this is a minimum time frame that you're deciding on, that you're going to work until you can have a better idea of how long the whole thing is going to take. So what you do is you tell the client, what are you okay with me? If I give you 6 hours on this, I can move this estimate from 20% certainty to 60% certainty, because I've gone in and I've started doing the actual work that's going to be, and in addition to that, that work is most likely applicable to the project. So I can take what I've done and just put it right into the project. And now I can say after 6 hours that this is going to take, you know, $1,400 instead of $4,000, right, or whatever it might end up being. And essentially you stop. So you work the 6 hours and kind of, I mean, maybe even just set a timer. It stops, you stop working, and you maybe leave yourself a half an hour extra on the end of it to compile notes and give a deliverable to the client on what that estimate is. And then save it, you know, put it in a GitHub repo or somewhere where you can use that on the project and potentially just go back and research and look more at it. But essentially this is giving yourself a small window to kind of get a grasp on a bigger problem that you would normally just kind of have to throw a number at.
We used to call them tech spikes.
Yeah.
Basically, you know, we're going to have to use a new module. Somebody's going to learn how to do that new module and figure out whether it actually does what we think it does.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I don't know how everybody's business model works, but that's billable time. I mean, you're doing that for the client. Yeah, you're learning. The client knows you're learning. You're telling them, hey, we're figuring this out. You know, they trust you to figure it out, and you spend that amount of time and see where you can get. If you need more time after that, talk to them. Be honest with your clients. Say, I spent 6 hours. I feel better about it, but I don't know for sure. If you gave me another 2, I could figure this other thing out. See what they say. If they say no, that's good enough. Like, we can go with that number, great. But this should at least get you somewhere closer to being able to make some sort of guess as to what you're working on.
From an overall estimating perspective, do you have like a line item of, here's where we're going to have our discovery time that's sort of separate from the line item estimates, or are you grabbing a piece from estimate of high uncertainty for the time boxing?
Usually I grab it from the high uncertainty. It could potentially be broken out into a separate discovery. I don't think it really matters as long as it's transparent where those hours are going and what they're being used for. I would probably keep them in the same bucket because, you know, the way I want to bill it is to put I want to know this piece took this many hours regardless of whether it was figuring it out or not. If you break it out that into another discovery, you might just have to kind of come back and pair that stuff up later. It's up to you.
Your project manager is saying here's the top line, don't worry about all the, you know, we'll show you all the sublines, but yeah, this one's over, but this one's under, so our top line is in line.
Right. Yep. Any other questions on that? It's probably I know it seems really obvious, but it's probably the piece that's saved me the most over the years of just being able to figure stuff out and actually come in with reasonable estimates. I'll tell everybody in here, like I've been working in Drupal for about a decade, and I've been working in software for longer than that, and I don't know how to estimate things with certainty. I don't think anybody that I've ever talked to does. So this kind of stuff, like using these tools to kind of get yourself into a place where you feel confident to talk about what you're building is super important. Because otherwise, I mean, everything we do, 9 times out of 10 in Drupal is probably custom. And yeah, some parts of that might have been done before, but probably not the same way you're doing it. Code reviews and QA. So another big part of a lead developer's job on a project, but just talking about it in general for everybody. This is also not, I didn't make any of this stuff up. A lot of people use pull requests for this, which is fine too. It's essentially the same system. But what I want to talk about is a little bit about stopping and smelling the flowers, whether they smell good or not. So pull the feature before the feature is merged, pull the release into the feature so that you're QAing against all the most recent code. Test the feature. This is you testing it. This is you running automated tests. I'm not talking about testing today, so you guys do whatever you want to do for testing. If the feature passes, pull it into the release. And then please, the most important part is stop and smell the flowers. Code review, the merged feature. If you're doing a merge, you're literally sitting there with some sort of tool open that you can diff the code. Please make sure no one has console logs, DPMs, crappy code, extra logic, weird merge conflicts. I've seen Git merge conflicts committed. I've seen all sorts of stuff that I can pull out last minute. I've seen my own stuff that I need to pull out last minute. It's not just junior devs. Just giving yourself this last review. And by the way, it shouldn't be you looking at yours. So the way we do it is it's always another developer. They're going to go ahead and pull your feature down, look at it. It might be the lead on the project 9 times out of 10. If it's my code, it might be someone that's not the lead on the project. Just making sure that we're all checking each other's code and looking at making sure we have each other's backs. So I think it's something that took maybe we were just behind on it over the years, and maybe we're still a little bit behind on it. But I think it's something that's often overlooked, of just having that little extra check before you merge something into a release. It's a good time to do a code review. That's all I really have about it. If you guys have questions about that, let me know.
So
But
the one thing that might be missing is rework time.
yeah,
'Cause,
right. Yeah.
So many developers think they have the problem solved, and then when it goes into QA, it comes back and,
Yep.
hey, I tried this air conditioner. You didn't catch for that.
Yep. And deciding with the project lead or the account manager, project manager, kind of where that time goes. So I think it's a big debate is that technically QA at that point? I think it's still dev work, in my opinion, because it never really made it past the devs. But yes, you're right. Trying to figure out kind of how to bill where that time goes, how much longer it's going to take.
Especially when you get into sprints. And I have worked with some people that I'm going to get this done. It may not be workable code, but I can mark it as done. And then it's, everything else is a bug.
Right.
And so that's charged, that's not development work, that's bug fixing.
Yep.
Even though the code never really worked at all.
Yep. That's all I've got. I think we've got some time for questions and anything else anybody wants to talk about. Thanks for coming, too.
You guys have so before you kind of get it, do things go through like a story phase?
Yes.
And then a technical review phase?
Yes.
Yes. And potentially back to the client with the results of that, and then it gets down to
Yes,
development.
and that's why, talking early on about why you want to be involved as a developer in the process is making sure your designers aren't designing stuff that you can't build, and they're not designing stuff, technically your project manager, someone should be making sure they're not designing stuff out of scope, but that's going to be, again, falling on everybody on the team to kind of check that stuff against requirements and estimates. So yes. Any other questions? Comments? Cool. Thanks, guys.